So I want to welcome everybody to the first LinkedIn Live edition of 22nd Century Management with Ken. I have with me an interesting guest today. Joe Sulima is a former corporate executive who's built powerhouse sales teams for startups to Fortune 500 companies. His goal is to help entrepreneurs and business leaders create hyper sales growth in their sales organization. So let's welcome Joe Sulima to the show.
Hey, Ken, great to be here.
Nice to have you with us. So tell us a little bit more about your background.
Sure, Ken. I started, believe it or not, I wanted to be a rock star when I grew up. So I started as in a rock band in Hollywood, California years ago. I was a very unsuccessful musician and went back to school and ended up getting a sales job. And I started my career selling office equipment door to door in the streets of Los Angeles, and worked my way up the corporate ladder. And 20 some odd years later, went through the ranks of corporate America. And I guess a couple of years ago, I just decided to take a break from all that and started my own consulting business, and now help business leaders and entrepreneurs build up and scale up their sales organizations.
Oh, very nice. So today we're going to talk about superstar hiring and how we set people up to build this, you could say, a superstar team. So let's start with the first piece of it, because obviously, and I teach service management in the same industry, in the copier industry, and that's one of the things I stress with people in my class is the need to make sure that you make good hiring decisions, because hiring is such an expensive process. So let's talk about superstar hiring. How do you find them and how do you hire them?
That's a great point, Ken. When we look at statistics, one of those decisions when you're making a hiring decision could cost you $50, $75, $150,000 when you put into the numbers, the opportunity cost, the benefit cost. So it's pretty important that you pick the right people. And so many times business leaders, they put more time and effort into buying a piece of equipment than they actually do for a salesperson. So one of the things, and I think it's kind of a no-brainer these days, that you want to have a good flow of candidates coming to you. But there's a couple of things to look out for. The first is the interviewing process itself. Are you using behavior type interviewing process? Because what a lot of companies are doing, they're just looking at somebody's resume and taking it for granted that they can be successful in the role. Behavioral based interviewing is key. And you'll see it a lot, and sometimes in larger organizations, where somebody will give you a scenario and ask you how you would perform in that in particular scenario, but it's not always live. It's not always active. So you really have to dive into that and say, well, give me a specific example from your career when this happened and how did you handle it? So part of the bringing on the right people is really having that interviewing process down. But before we even get to the interviewing process, Ken, I'd say one of the things that you really need to do, and business leaders need to really take a deep dive into, is who exactly do you want on your team? What are their characteristics? Do they need to have experience in your industry, or would you take some outside industry experience? Is it more important to have a self-starter, or are you really somebody that likes them to follow direction, does things your way? All those things have to come into play to really get those powerhouse people. The second thing is you really want to go after the people that are already successful, and now it's a little challenging in some of the economy times we've gone through, but you really want to get somebody that's already actively working, and you want to have somebody that's already very successful. And there's different techniques and tricks and things you can find to find those successful people, but you're looking for high performers, not just the average Joe, nothing wrong with Joe, but you want to get that high performer, the one who comes in and says, I'm 110% a goal. I'm the number one guy in my company. I'm the number 3 guy in my industry. That's what you're looking for. So that's kind of step one in the hiring process, to make sure you have those characteristics in place, and those are the kind of people you're getting to apply for your jobs.
Okay, yeah, and it's very interesting because I talked about that same thing. In fact, I tell service managers in the training that I provide that you don't want to buy or hire, I shouldn't say buy, but hire technicians that are unemployed. Because an unemployed technician, there's a reason he's unemployed, and none of those reasons are typically going to be good unless they relocate it. It is very much a key piece of it is to make a good hiring decision. Let me ask a question along those lines. Are you a fan of the DISC test or something like that to try to find the candidates you want, maybe even before you start the interview process?
That's a great question. And Ken, that comes up a lot. I personally look at that as just one tool out of many. The reason being is that That's just a test, and tests can be beaten. And I've proven that time and time where I've had salespeople work with me, even myself. I've taken some of those tests, and you can make the test do what you want. You really can.
Yeah.
So that's just one part of the process. I really look at the disc is one part, of course, the resume itself and what's on the resume. But believe it or not, I even put more emphasis on the references, because checking references and checking them the right way is a great example to see. For instance, I was working with an organization where they found a great candidate, great references, and I said, well, let's call this reference and let's tell them exactly what this salesperson is going to be doing, the kind of role they're going to be doing. Because there's some people that are great in new business development and some are more of the account management side. So we got on the phone with the reference and said, hey, we're bringing this person on. We're really interested, but we want some feedback. Could you tell me a little bit about their background? And of course they said they're great. They're the greatest person they've ever met, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then we say, it's important that we bring the right person on the organization. This is what the tasks are going to look like. It's important that we bring them on not only for our success, but we want to make sure they can be successful here. So in the next 3 months, 6 months, they're going to be with us. So based on that, this is the job description. Do you think that they'd be able to do this job successfully? And the feedback came back that, well, now that you tell me that, no, I really don't think they would be a good fit for you. So that reference piece is just as important. And one of the key components that, a lot of times people forget about, they don't even check references these days. But I'd say the disc, the interviewing process, the resumes, and the reference, it's all part of that hiring process.
Well, and that's very nice. I love what you just said about asking them about the role. And, in sales, I kind of separate them into two categories. You have the hunters and you have the farmers.
Right.
And so obviously you don't want to hire a farmer if you need a hunter, and vice versa. So
exactly.
That makes a big difference.
And that happens so often because sometimes you just can't tell the difference. And believe it or not, sometimes a hunter is really a bad position. It's really the wrong person for what you're trying to do, because they don't have the mentality to nurture an account. They just want to sell and move on, sell and move on. So it is important to have those kind of discussions and giving that to the reference. And that's a key component. I'm yet to find a company that does that consistent. But if there's one thing that I would share with everybody that you want to take away from this is when you're doing your reference checks, make sure you let that reference know this is the position. What are your thoughts now? Would they still be a good person for us or not?
Okay, well, that's very nice. And by the way, for those of you that are watching this live, do me a favor, let us know where you're watching from. And if you have any comments, you can put them in the comments on LinkedIn, and we'll try to get to them. Or if you have questions, we'll try to get to those at the end. Okay, so Joe, after you've hired somebody, let's say you found the perfect candidate, which maybe not, but somebody close to the perfect candidate. Now, how is it that you start to set them up for success? How do you get them to be able to come in, onboard them, and get them up and running so that they have the tools they need to succeed?
Great question, Ken. Another challenge that I see in the marketplace is you find this great candidate. You go through the process, you finally get them to join your organization, and yet you don't have an onboarding process that makes sense. That most candidates are going to make a decision in that first 90 days if they're going to stay with you or not. So it is important that you have a good process set up. So the first thing, it's just a quick day-to-day operations. But you want to have their first 30 days set up, their first 60 days set up, and their first 90 days. One of the things I always share with people is to have what I call the good buddy system. I started with a company, and day one, they just partnered me up with somebody who was like, hey, this is your buddy for the next 90 days. And that person kind of walked me through everything. They kind of know who the go-to people are, who do I go to for my expense reports, who do I go to for equipment, whatever it is I need. So I always recommend that there's some kind of support person in place for the go-to. The second thing is you really want to have it mapped out, all of the administrative tasks mapped out, whether it's the first week, the first 2 weeks, the first month, but get all of that out of the way. So they want to know where all the administrative things come into place. Next, it's really the training of the product and the service. Are they equipped, depending if you're a product-based company or a service-based company? Do they know your products and services? What kind of process you have in place to have them trained? Some larger corporations, they already have a formal training in place, but a lot of small, medium-sized companies that have, less employees and don't have that kind of infrastructure, you have to do it on your own. But you do have to have some kind of process in place to help them do that. Also, part of that process is, who are the competitors? Do they know who the competitors are in the marketplace? depending on if it's a service or, again, product-based business. If it's product, what are some of the biggest objections that the person's going to come over, right? You want to make sure that they're fully armed, that they know all the key objections. One of the challenges I see when I go into a company and they're say, I hire these salespeople and they're, every 90, 120 days, 6 months, I'm getting new people in all the time. Well, let's take a look at your onboarding process. You need to give them the tools. Part one is going to give them that training, of the products and services, the common objections that they're going to uncover. But then it comes down to, are you a territorial-based company where somebody has a geographic, or is it account-based? And depending on how that is, what are the boundaries? So everybody knows what the expectation is. And if it's account-based, what are the accounts? And if there's any grandfathered accounts, are all those in place? Because the worst thing you want to do for a new salesperson, he just lands a great account, finds out that it's grandfathered to somebody else, or that there's some other parameters in place. So that's kind of it. You want to map out their first 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days with milestones and expectations in place. And it doesn't have to be elaborate, but there does have to be some kind of outline in place so they know what to expect. They know where everything goes. And then you've got that buddy system helping them get to that next level as well, and who to go to and when to go to that person.
Okay. And it's interesting because I have a lot of similar philosophies. I tell my service managers that they need to have a process set up, and I call it a 100-day plan that walks them through every piece of what needs to be done. I'm a fan of every form should have in writing how to fill it out, where it goes, who uses it, why it's important. So that, and I look at it like the McDonald's training philosophy. So that, because at McDonald's, if you wanted to know how to cook a hamburger, it was on the grill right in front of you. And he told you where the special sauce went, how many pickles, all of that was down in writing, so that that you generate a consistent output, a consistent product when you're done.
Well, that's right. You want to have a great process in place. And that onboarding process is really so important, because that first 90 days, people are, it's new. If you've just hired a high performer, they just left an organization where they may have been in it for years. They're used to a certain way of doing things. So you want to make sure they're ingrained to your methodologies, your culture, understand how things are going. And if you just kind of leave them to their own devices, so many times I'll see that a new sales rep's on board, and for 2 weeks, they're still just trying to figure out, where they go, what accounts they manage. Nobody's trained them on anything yet. Those are the kind of things that lose the momentum. And you don't want, especially with high performers. We're not talking average sales teams. We're talking high performance sales teams. And when you're building that high performance sales team, you think differently, you act differently. You've just bought a Ferrari. You're going to let it sit in the garage? No, you want to get that thing on the road. It's the same thing. You want to make sure that you have the tools necessary so they can get the ground running. And that's why that onboarding process is probably one of the most overlooked, but still something that's so critical to getting your new person up and running quickly.
Okay, so we've got this person, we got the right person hired. We've onboarded them good. Now, the next question is how do we create this high expectation sales culture?
Great question, Ken. That's one of the things and I spend more time on creating sales cultures probably than anything else. Because when you're looking at high performance, this is really where the rubber meets the road. It's really getting that expectation out there. A lot of times companies, especially in today's generation, things have changed a little bit, right? Everybody gets a trophy. There's nobody left behind. But when we're in sales organization, it's all about the numbers. The sales organization is the most important part of your company, right? They drive everything. So the end result is everything. So one of the things we always put in place is, what are the numbers? What are the expectations? What are the daily goals? What are the weekly goals? What are the quarterly goals? Every day I always ask myself, what did we sell today? What did we sell yesterday? Where are we compared to where we were a week ago, a month ago? So part of creating that is creating that culture of it's all about the sales organization. It's all about the numbers. So whether you have some organizations, you walk in the front door and you'll see the big sales board, and you'll see all the sales reps, and you'll know exactly what they did today, what their revenue to goal is, what the percentages are. That's a key component to have the emphasis on the sales, emphasis on that. And one of the things that helps do is it weeds out the non-performers. Because remember, we're going for high performance. We want high performers in the organization. And people that get intimidated by seeing those numbers on the board all the time and seeing that they're kind of inching the way on the bottom, they're going to weed themselves out. So that's one thing we want to do, is to build that organization, to build that structure towards all about sales culture. Then it's the encouragement. It's also the recognition. Ken, I think you probably know this as well in the organizations you've been in. that a salesperson, and most people in general, will do more for recognition than anything else. I think Napoleon even talked about how surprising you'd be surprised what a general will do to get another ribbon on his chest. Salespeople are no different. Money's great, and everybody thinks let's just throw money at them, let's incentivize them that way. But that's not always the case. Recognition. You recognize your top stars because they love the recognition. I work with organizations where they've taken the sales team and instead of doing individual contributors, they've now put them in a team approach. And the results have actually gone down. One, because you can't track the individual results, but two, the recognition isn't the same. And again, high performers act differently than the group. High performers want that recognition. They want the trophies. They want to see their name at the top of the board. So that's the other thing you do when you're putting a high performance team in place and creating a culture like that that's all about sales contribution and who's raising to the top. And then the recognition. And it could be all kind of different ways you can award salespeople. There used to be annual awards for the top performers. Some companies, because of their size and scope and because of COVID, you were doing things more on a local basis. But you have to reward your top performers and create that culture. It's all about sales. You can't hide in team. You can't hide behind anything else. It's all about, this is the number. It's on the board. What did you sell today, this week, this month? Are you on track or are you not on track? So there's a big component of the sales culture in putting that high performance pressure on there.
Yeah, and I agree 100% on the recognition, and I think it's pretty much everywhere that it matters. I run into this in the sense with technicians, and too often technicians don't get much recognition. And I encourage the sales managers to look for ways to make sure that they get recognized, because we all like that pat on the back. Now, obviously, the bigger our ego and the more driven we are, the more value that pat on the back has, because, we really crave that. I think that's part of what makes us, push beyond the average or beyond the ordinary, I guess I'd say.
Absolutely. Everybody has that ego. Everybody wants to be recognized. Whether you're sweeping the floors, whether you're a technician, whether you're a salesperson, there should be the interaction, and there's got to be a way to recognize top performers. Obviously in this context, we're talking about sales and sales culture, but a big part, especially in service organizations, I know when I worked for a sales organization where we had equipment and technicians working with us, one, I got a ton of leads from my technical people. They would tell me which machines are breaking down and where I need to go. And you know what? I had no problem giving them part of my commission because they helped me and giving them that recognition. Because unfortunately, most technicians don't make a ton of money. So there's ways, different things to keep them on board. What's going to stop them from jumping from your company to another company? Money's great, but the recognition, being part of a team, being part of that bigger vision, that's so many different things you can do to help build that culture. But it's always around, the sales culture. Everything's got to be based on that, because now you can get your technical people involved as well and somehow structure things for the technical people. How can we recognize the top tech, the guy who generates the most leads for the sales team, the guy that helps them? So there's a lot of things you can do to help you even enforce that. But the company has to be sales culture oriented. Otherwise, you'll never get to that level of high performance you're looking for. It just doesn't happen unless there's an emphasis on it. There's so many companies that are manufacturing driven, that are marketing driven. They're more happy to talk about the latest marketing campaigns than actually the sales performance, or they want to talk about their great facilities and how clean the floors are. And that's great. But if that's not contributing to the sales piece of it, to the sales culture, it just doesn't matter, because none of those exist without a sales organization that's pumping out volume and getting sales in.
Yeah, nothing happens till somebody sells something.
Exactly. Doesn't change. It never will.
Okay, so after you've got this team, and you've built and you've got the right culture, there's still always going to be some kind of gaps in that they need help with. So how do you coach them through the gaps?
Well, that's a great point. One of the things with top sales reps and top performers, if you look at it in the sports world, there's always a lot of analogies between sports and business. That Michael Jordan had a coach. Now, his coach couldn't play basketball anywhere near him, right? Michael Jordan was a superstar, but he still needed a coach to help him get to that next level, to help him where his gaps are. Tiger Woods, same thing. He had a coach for how many years teaching him where he needed to be. The difference when you're teaching or when you're coaching the high performance reps, it's not about techniques at that point. It's okay, let's wear the bottlenecks. For instance, I worked with a rep that was a very high performer. He wasn't in a top market. He was in more of a secondary city. Yet he was one of the top reps in the company. But he was never getting to that next level, and he struggled, and he was working insane hours. And, how do we help this person get to the next level? We tried putting assistants in place to help him and take some of the admin work off his shoulders. Nothing was working. Finally, I had to sit down with him and say, okay, where are the real bottlenecks? What's really holding you back? Well, now we start to get tactical. Now we're talking a little bit more strategy. So we're coaching him at that point. That's not about sales techniques anymore, but it's, okay, there's certain products that you can sell that have higher price points that can pick up your volume. There's certain ways that we can maximize the compensation program by working on how you're selling and what your margin is doing. There's certain things we can do from the territory, so you're not the star rep going from one part of the territory to the other part of the territory in the same day and blocking off your time. So there's different methodologies to coach your salespeople at that level that it goes beyond just day-to-day sales training. It's going to be more strategy, and what can we do from a strategy standpoint? The other thing about, especially when you're talking about high performance salespeople, is they're extremely competitive. And you really have to have a backbone when you're talking to them, because some of them have egos that are the size of the building, right? So you need to be able to stand up to them. They know that you're not as good as them at sales. I mean, most sales managers, as a sales manager, I was not as good as my top sales rep. I was okay, but that's what they do. The skills that make us sales managers and sales leaders are not the same skills that make us great salespeople. But you still have to build up that respect for them, and they have to have that respect back so they can understand that you're there to help them. And that's a key part to it, is understanding that, hey, you're the superstar here. We know that. Our job as coaches is to get you to that higher level of performance. So where are the roadblocks? What bottleneck can we help you with? But the other part of that is also helping them, within the team context. Where do they fit within the team? Because top performers want to be on a top performing team. They don't want to be with a bunch of losers. So you want to make sure that the team is, they literally will pull up the other teammates. And Michael Jordan talks about that all the time. And, that movie he made, The Last Dance, I think it was a couple years that came back. And he talks about how he helped elevate the rest of the people on his team, because no salesperson wants to work for a losing team. So the point is to not only coach your superstars that way, but coach all of them and help them get to that next level. And by doing this, your bottom person is going to weed himself out, and you're automatically going to start to have that elevation. But the coaching is so critical of it. Most people wait, and that coaching session becomes more of a corrective issue when they're not quite performing. And that's not really where coaching should come into play. Coaching should come into play to get to that next level no matter where they're at. And no person on your team is more important than those high performers. Because if you had, most companies are looking at your players, whether they're A, B, and C. A lot of coaches, a lot of managers are working with their C players trying to elevate them. And if you have a C player, and we'll just use round numbers, doing, let's say, $1 million in revenue, and you can get an extra 10 or 20% out of them, okay, it's extra 200,000. Your A player is probably already doing 3 million. If you can get that same 10 or 20% lift out of your A player, you just increased your revenue 300 to 600,000. So where would you spend your time? You want to work with your A players. You want to coach your A players and get them to that level.
Okay. And that's an interesting perspective, because on the technician side, I'm always looking at, okay, how do I take my worst performing technician? And there are times you're going to have to make a decision to get rid of him, but how can I make him a little better and just keep raising him up? And eventually he won't be the worst. You get the next guy is now the worst. And so you keep pushing the whole team up. But it's a little different in the compared to the sales environment, because a lot of times it's more training than it is coaching. Exactly.
Sometimes with the sales organization, with the top reps, more often than not, it's not more training, it's more tactical, or the tactical aren't nearly as important. It's going to be more strategy. It's going to be more roadblocks. It's how we get things out of the way. At the B and C level, those are the people that gets a little bit more tactical because they're missing some key components. But the goal, again, high performance. So we're going to look at how can we build that high performance team. If you're building from scratch, you're going to look at a whole different set of resumes and a whole different set of people. If you already have a sales team in place and now you're saying, okay, how do I rebuild or restructure or how to grow it? Well, yeah, you're right to your point, Ken. There's going to be some tough decisions to make at the C-level players. Do we keep them? Do we not keep them? And the reality is, if you want a high-performing sales organization and really get that hyper growth, tough decisions are going to have to be made for some of those players. And they may not make it, but that's okay. You want the best. And that's how you do that. Continually work with the best, get from that level, The C players are going to weed themselves out anyway, and then you just keep going up and up. And eventually, your worst player, I'm not sure what happened. Eventually, your worst player becomes one of the best players for another company. So that's the way it works. So if that's how your company is set up, your worst player is actually as good as the best player on somebody else's team. That's ideally how you want it to go.
Yeah, at that point in time, you definitely have a higher performing sales team. But, Joe, I have really enjoyed our conversation together today. What I'm going to do is I will put links to your information in the both the YouTube version of this and on LinkedIn, so people can get in contact with you if they want to learn more about the process. Like I said, you've been such a fascinating guest. Hopefully one of these days we can have you back on and find another some more nuggets of information to really help build up sales teams and salespeople.
It was my pleasure. It was great to be here today with you, Ken, and I'd love to share any insight I can with anybody who needs any help or has some questions. Please feel free to reach out, and look forward to coming back again in the future and sharing more insight and go even a little bit more deeper on each of these topics.
All right. Well, thanks, Joe.
Thank you.